Welcome back to Steps to Statehood Level 2. In this level, we have learned how America was organized after the American Revolution and what events are leading to Indiana becoming the 19th state. Let's review our key point before getting started. Many events led to Indiana's statehood. Even after the French and Indian War and the Proclamation of 1763, people still fought for control of North America. Native Americans continued to be pushed off their land in order for Europeans to create settlements and colonies. England began to tax colonists without representation, causing the colonists to declare their independence and fight for it in the American Revolution. Many years would pass before the Northwest Territory was formed and the Enabling Act was passed. These events would ultimately lead to Indiana becoming its own state. Our big question: what events most contributed to Indiana becoming a state? We have so far learned about the American Revolution and how Indiana took part in the American Revolution with George Rogers Clark and his militia fighting Henry Hamilton. We've learned about the years following the American Revolution as they organized the land in the Northwest Territory with the Northwest Ordinance and the Land Ordinance of 1787. We've learned how Native Americans continued to cause conflict in that region, how the War of 1812 finally got rid of the British in the United States, and now we're finally learning about how Indiana became a state. So let's get started looking at the final events that led Indiana to becoming the 19th state. We want to be able to describe the events that took place in order for Indiana to become a state. Our first challenge is what first had to happen in order for Indiana to apply for statehood. How did the Enabling Act help Indiana become a state? Who was Indiana's first governor? What city was Indiana's first capital? And what rights are protected by Indiana's Constitution? Please make sure you're answering those in complete sentences as we go forward, or at the very end. It doesn't matter either way. If we come to something and you feel like, yeah, we're ready to answer it, go ahead and answer it. Let's talk about on the road to statehood. With the threats of the Native American attack mostly gone, the Northwest Territory continued to grow. Remember that they had just battled against Tecumseh and against the Prophet and the Battle of Fallen Timbers and the Battle of Tippecanoe. William Henry Harrison had helped rid this region of the Native Americans. With the threat of the Native American attack now gone, they were ready to grow. As a result, it had to be divided several times. The Northwest Territory, Ohio, and Michigan would become states before Indiana. The Indiana Territory, too, was growing fast. Remember that the Northwest Territory was later divided into the Indiana Territory, and that territory, too, was also growing fast. Not as fast as Ohio and Michigan because they became states first, but it was still growing pretty fast. In 1813, the capital was moved from Vincennes, where it was, to Corydon. The 1815 census, a census is a compilation, a gathering, kind of making known how many people are in a certain area. The 1815 census showed that Indiana had a large enough population, more than 63,000 free adults, to apply for statehood. To become a state, it needed at least 60,000. So that means that the first thing they couldn't apply to become a state until this first thing was done. This is a challenge, is they had to have 60,000 free adults to apply for statehood. And they had 63, so that was the biggest step they needed to first have. The Enabling Act. Jonathan Jennings, Indiana's representative in Congress, asked Congress to pass the Enabling Act. This law would allow Indiana to become a state. He succeeded because Congress passed the law in April and President James Madison signed the Enabling Act into law. The Enabling Act finally gave Indiana its own boundaries and called for voters to elect delegates to attend a meeting to discuss Indiana's statehood. 43 delegates were selected. All these delegates came from different parts of the state, not just from one, and that was to make sure that everybody from around the region, around the territory, got a voice in how Indiana was organized. Jonathan Jennings was selected to lead the convention, and the majority of the delegates agreed to statehood, and they began to write a constitution. Indiana's first constitution, which was signed on June 29th, 1816, created Indiana's government. It was set up, and it is still set up, just like our national government, with a governor in charge of the executive branch, the General Assembly, which is in charge of the legislative branch, and the state Supreme Court, which is in charge of the judicial branch. The Constitution promised to protect the basic rights of the people of Indiana. It protected the freedom of speech and religion. However, unfortunately, it did not yet give women, African Americans, or Native Americans the right to vote. That eventually would change, but back in these days, they only allowed men to vote, white men more specifically, to vote. The good news is the delegates did vote to make slavery illegal in Indiana. Remember that it was already illegal in the Northwest Territory, but they wanted to make sure that it would also be illegal in Indiana. The Constitution also promised a public school system, meaning that all the children, as they were growing up, would be able to attend school paid by government taxes, and it's still in place today. Your education, for example, is still paid for with these taxes. The 19th state. The delegates sent the new written constitution to Washington, D.C. to have it signed by President James Madison. On December 11th, 1860, Indiana became the 19th state to join the United States of America. In August of 1816, Indiana voters chose leaders for the new government. Jonathan Jennings has played an important role so far. He went to Congress because he was a representative to ask for the Enabling Act, and then he was in charge of the convention that wrote our Constitution, and now we are electing him to be our state's first governor. Indiana's voters also voted for the first representatives for the General Assembly. The General Assembly is the governing body that makes our laws down in the Capitol. Corydon became the state's capital. Remember, they moved the capital of the Indiana Territory from Vincennes to Corydon. Well, when the Indiana Territory became a state, they left the capital in Corydon. That might be a little perplexing to you because right now, Corydon is not our capital, Indianapolis is, but Corydon was our first state capital, and it would remain the state capital, the state government, where the state government happens until 1825. The Constitution of 1816 served as the state's constitution for 35 years when they decided to make changes and create the Constitution that we still use today. So it served its purpose. It allowed Indiana to get its start, set some good rules, some good framework for the people then to follow, but eventually they would change it 35 years later, and we still use that when they changed 35 years later today. This is the end of Mission 3 of Level 2. Make sure that you are ready to answer your challenge questions. You're ready to take the checkpoint. This is also the end of Level 3, or Level 2, sorry. Please be ready to level up very soon. I will see you in just a little bit, hopefully, to review some things in Level 2 and to help you be ready to level up. If you have any questions, please let me know.